Well, welcome to the God is Better Than You Think podcast. My name is Josh. I am a pastor and a former journalist who reported on abuse scandals in evangelical institutions. It's published in the Washington Post. I was in the recent Amazon documentary Shiny Happy People, and I am here with my co-host Taylor Blubaugh, a friend and a foster mom, and someone who is really passionate about social justice and equality and the way that that works itself out in practical ways in the local church.
Each week we have conversations with people who take following Jesus seriously, but in doing that have found themselves heading in surprising or hopeful or unexpected places. And the more we hear these stories, the more we realize that our faith is farther reaching and more beautiful and more inclusive than we may have realized. And that maybe God is better than we think.
That's the name of the podcast. Oh, man. So our guest today is a gentleman named Nathan Daniel Blake. And here's the story of how we decided to have him on. I just saw a tweet. It was just a random tweet from Nathan, who I was not following at that point. And it just said this: I grew up with guns. I've owned guns my entire life. This week, those guns are being locked away. I've had enough. We are called to a different way of life, to be in this world, but not of this world. And so I sent that text to Taylor. I was like, Taylor, what do you think? We started looking into what Nathan has done, a lot of his writings that was online, what he is up to in his world. And what we found is someone who is an Appalachian, Anglican, Celtic, living sort of in tune with nature, but then also coming from a very high church tradition. It was fascinating. I'm like, I don't know if I've ever interacted with someone who is this blend of stuff, which is kind of perfect for what we are and what we do. And so we are going to interview him and talk about all of that. But first, the theme music and a game of Bible Taboo.
Whoop, whoop.
I've never done this where I don't have my mic stand.
You've got to keep your cards or I can't see.
I don't know how to do that. No, you don't have to completely turn. Here, I got it. I got it. Okay.
Ready?
Yep.
Set. You just flip them up one at a time.
What?
You don't have to put the whole stack up there. Just
okay.
put them in the thing.
I'm confused. I don't like the way you're treating me. Okay.
Okay. 3. Right. You do what you want. 3. 2.
I don't feel like I can.
1. Go.
Okay. Oh, whenever you are
sad,
paying something
Tithes.
that they are owed,
debt.
It's like
no, don't skip.
It's like retribution. It's really close to that word, but a little bit different. Like whenever you are tired, you need to
restore, redeem, replenish.
Whenever you're tired, you need to
sleep.
Or another word,
rest.
Yes.
I said rest.
Mm-hmm, and then
restitution.
Yes. We got it. Okay. I am. Let's see here. Shoot.
I'm gonna need you to make up some ground.
Not a girl, but a
boy,
but older.
Man.
Yes. 2 people originally, first people, Genesis.
Adam and Eve.
Yes. No, we don't want to save our Savior. Give us
Barabbas.
Yes.
Woo.
Wow. Okay.
What we get? What's our number?
Restitution was rough.
I thought the last one was going to be like, we don't need no education.
Education.
We turned a corner from Bible Taboo into Pink Floyd Taboo. It's a very niche game.
It's a super easy segue.
We got 4. Which ties our record.
Which ties the record.
Yeah. I feel pretty good about that.
That's a high five.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
We didn't skip one this time, which feels like maybe a step up.
I guess. Last time we got 5, but we lost a point. So maybe it's a step down. It's hard to say. Anyways. Well, this is the God is Better Than You Think podcast. We're here today with Nathan Daniel Blake. Now, first order of business, I probably should have asked you this before we started recording. Do you go? I mean, is Nathan Daniel Blake, is this the official name that you would like us to be using for this podcast?
Most people call me Nathan. The reason I added the middle name, honestly, was because when I got started in marketing and branding, there was a famous soccer player named Nathan Blake. And without my middle name, I got slammed down to like page 20 of Google. But with Daniel in there, I shot right up to the top. I mean, anything I did. So I actually learned that from a guy named David Meerman Scott, and because his name was David Scott. And so that's how it started. So professionally, anything written is always those three names. It's just become kind of habit.
That's why you go by Taylor Annabelle Blubaugh.
It's Annabelle. That's not my name.
No, it is. Anyway,
Right?
Nathan. Well, thanks. See? No, it's going to catch on.
That's going to be a thing.
Hashtag Annabelle.
Yeah. Hashtag Annabelle.
Yeah. Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Man, Nathan, I just feel like we're in such good hands with you on this podcast today.
I'm excited.
We'll see how we feel at the end. Yeah. Yeah.
Man, well, Nathan, we actually, earlier before we started this, I was telling the story of how we actually found you in the first place, which was a tweet that you had recently, probably maybe about a month ago now, but it was about your decision, like your change of position on guns and how you were making a change of like that and the backlash you got from that. But that led to us just doing a deep dive on everything that was you and getting really excited about the really unique,
oh, good Lord.
And there are so many different streams that you bring to the table of like what makes up your sort of spiritual DNA. I'm so excited to unpack. The first thing I would be interested in is to tell
I'm
us,
officially scared now at this point. If you guys did a deep dive, I'm a little scared.
I did a real deep dive. I feel like women my age, like Instagram, internet stalking is our spiritual gift. So I claimed that and did it.
Yeah, my wife has that gift. Yeah.
So good.
So something I'd be interested in, like, let's start with hearing a little bit about where you're at right now in life, and then we'll probably backtrack from there and kind of hear a little bit about what got you to that point. But both like in terms of just like life logistics, family work, all that stuff, but then also with this very unique spiritual formation that you're stepping into. I'd love to hear a little bit about that as well.
Yeah. So in matters of life, my wife and I, it is both of our second marriage. And we have a blended family of 6 children. But so there's 6 of them ranging from 20 to 13. And professionally, I always say that I was a writer who kind of fell backwards into marketing and copywriting. But I think that it all stems from this gift of 1, words, and 2, I've just always been really good at building relationships. Spiritually, man, I was raised non-denom. I despite what other people say that I'm not real Appalachian, apparently because of some of my views. My earliest church memories were in house churches. I lived in a drafty old farmhouse with 3 other Christian families, after the Jesus revolution took off. Like my family, was building on communal land when nobody else, would take the step, so my parents, who are still pretty conservative, and I think I challenged them a lot in that area for a long time. I remember it was probably a year ago, we were sitting around dinner and I'm recounting like my earliest like church memories in like a really like friendly way. Like we're just, having memories. And I suddenly just looked at my mom and dad and I was like, it's your fault I'm the way I am. Like
I resonate with that.
You raised me in house churches, drafty farmhouses with other families. When my parents were building, we lived in a tent for 6 months. Like anything that I am is all your fault.
What you just said is something Taylor and I have talked about of like where we're like talking, like we're thinking back through our upbringing and being like, it was the values that you actually taught me. I just followed them to what I would consider a logical conclusion that you did not anticipate.
Next conclusion. Yeah, absolutely.
100%.
So those house churches, there was a bunch of house churches that came together, I'm guessing for logistical reasons. And the church I grew up in was literally 2 double wides that were put together like this, and they were well constructed. They still stand today. But I didn't think anything of it growing up, other than our sanctuary was not a sanctuary. Yeah, but I deconstructed. I deconstructed before it was cool. I was in my mid-20s, and it's like so many people are. I think that's a natural age to do that at. And when I came back, I remember telling my dad that I feel like when I want to go deeper, people keep wanting me to go further, right? They keep telling me to get more involved. They keep telling me to do more things. They keep more and more and more. And I don't want more land. I want to go deeper into the land that I'm already on. I want to go down 1,000 feet, not 1,000 acres, right? And I just couldn't find that in and it's not to say there's not. I mean, there's great people doing evangelical work. Greg Boyd is one of my favorite living theologians. I mean, there's people in the evangelical sphere that are doing amazing things. I'm not like all evangelicals are bad. I just think, like all streams of the faith, there are some problems. And for me, I came back on the backs. It just so happened I found that depth in people like Thomas Merton. I found it in Athanasius. I found it in Origen. I found it in the Desert Fathers and the mystics. And so I have this weird bent of like both like orthodoxy and Catholicism mixed with like this evangelical upbringing, so I always tell, like, even in the work I'm doing now, I would love to say like I'm wearing like a monk habit and, I'm very soft spoken, but I know that when you look at me, like I look like every preacher that I don't want to go to their church, right? But that's just, I'm trying in all things, and we're going to lead that to the other conversation. Really, like, for me, it's not about picking a camp. I'm just trying to be thoughtful about the decisions I make. I'm trying to be true to who God has made me to be, true to Scripture, but also true to the bigger work that I see happening in the church and what that's going to have to look like in a post-Christian world. And I'm trying to find those intersections and be true to them and be thoughtful about them. And it just seems that it makes a lot of people really unhappy with me. And I don't fully understand why. Other than it gives me a chance to practice being Jesus. I just try to stay above it as much as I can.
That's really beautiful. I think you found yourself in a space where we're certainly not against that. That doesn't make us frustrated or bothered. That is very encouraging. I think that's kind of the nature of this podcast, is to have conversations with people that find themselves in that space of deeply wanting to pursue Jesus and know him and follow the ways that he taught, but figure out what that means in terms of letting go some of the boxes that we were given of what that looks like and finding ways to be the good of Jesus in the world.
Well, and like something you said, I don't know if I've really thought about this so much, but I was raised with this idea of like, you have to kind of pick a side. And so there's like the liberal side and there's the conservative side or the charismatic or whatever. And something you said really resonates with me, which is, and those sides existed for a reason, and there's historical blah, blah, blah. And I get all that. But I would also say that, like, I think for me, maybe for you, Taylor, I don't know, but is like, I'm not super concerned with like which side am I falling on. I'm more concerned with like, I want to find something that's true. I want to find something that's real. I want to find something. And that feels like life. One of the things I think I'd be interested in hearing from you is like, you kind of said like, I deconstructed before it was cool. What do you feel like you had to work out? What did you have to kind of purge? Like, do you feel like you had to kind of walk away from before you were able to find your way back to a new version of following Jesus?
I remember the moment that my coming back happened, and I was in Mexico, and I woke up. I had a dream, and I couldn't tell you what the dream was, but I remember getting out of bed, and I went into the bathroom, and I shut the door, and I just remember, like, I remember how cold the tile was. Right, I remember these things, and I remember whatever it was in the dream had a lot to do with this very real sense that, well, I guess I'm getting ahead of myself, because I can remember the moment I started deconstructing, which was I was a junior in high school. I'm standing in this charismatic worship. I'm surrounded by these families that I have grown up with. I mean, they were like second parents to me. And I remember looking ahead at it was my best friend's parents were like standing ahead of us. And they're dancing. I mean, just so much joy, right? And the songs are familiar. And I remember thinking, there are millions of people on this earth. And so many of them believe about their God the same way that I have been taught to believe about my God. And they're sitting there thinking, those Christians, how silly, right? And what if we're wrong? What if I'm not doing all of this fun stuff that my friends are doing? I'm not getting to do any of this stuff, and it's not even real, right? And it was like a fleeting thought, and I'm back to work. But it was like that tickle. I don't know that I ever gave up on God, but I definitely like tried to figure out, and I think this is where like the depth part came in. But I remember, anyways, I'm sitting in Mexico, and at this point, I just had been told so many times what being a Christian looked like. Like you referenced earlier, this is what a Christian believes. This is how you act. These are the words you say. These are the words you don't say. These are the clothes you wear. These are the words the clothes you don't wear. These are the people you hang out with. These are the people you don't hang out with. It was like a list. It was this list of rules that we had put on top, just like Second Temple Junior. We had put on top of Scripture, like we had put guardrails around the guardrails to make sure that we obeyed the fence inside the guardrails, right? And I just remember saying audibly to God, I can't do it. I can't do it. I'm not wired for Christianity. I'm not wired for this. And I remember clearly this, like the closest that anything has ever been to audible, this word inside my spirit just said, just love. Which sounds in 2024 like I just ripped it off Twitter. But this is like 2004, and this isn't trendy yet, right? Like God is not a God of just loving people and loving God. Like it's not. And I started there. I mean, I was lucky enough that that's when the emergent movement was really coming up. And so there were some progressive authors, Rachel Held Evans, Tony Stewart. Like there were a bunch of like McLaren, Tony Campolo. I mean, these are the evangelicals, right? That kind of it allowed me to say there are other people out there who think differently that still love Jesus truly and authentically. And I didn't agree with all of them, but it gave me the permission to say there's a spectrum here, and I can fall on the spectrum. So yeah, I think that's probably the thing that I had to let go of, was this idea that it's either this way or you can't follow Jesus. Like you follow these rules, and if you fall off, you're in danger of hell, right? And now the next 20 years have been this. I no longer call it deconstruction. It goes back to what we're thinking. Like I'm trying to be a steady letting go of these preconceived notions of what things are, and really digging into going back to the first couple centuries. Like we've never had a clear picture of what hell is. We've never had a clear theology of what anything is. I mean, we don't agree on even the things that like are heresies. Yeah. Were really just two fathers that didn't get along, and one won in court and the other one was kicked out of Christianity, right? Like I've come to the place, I don't even think many of the heretics like really didn't love God. I think they just lost.
So something that I've noticed as I've been reading some of your writings is you seemingly, and if I'm wrong, please tell me, but it seems like, so you're taking this idea, which is sort of this, I mean, for me, Dallas Willard was probably the one that kind of got me into some of this thinking of like, there's a kingdom of heaven that's coming right here and now, right? That you are taking this, but the way that you are then figuring out, okay, so what does this look like? And what does this mean? That you are contextualizing it in a very specific culture and community. Specifically, I mean, you talk about sort of this Appalachian rule of life that you're leaning into. I would like first, before we get into some of like the specifics of what that even means, like tell us about Appalachia. Tell us about that as a part of your culture, as a part of who you are. What does that mean? What is that experience for you?
Okay, well, first of all, you said
he's going to correct the pronunciation.
It's Appalachia. All right.
Yeah. I'm a Yankee.
I will stand up and walk off this putt now. No. It's Appalachia. No. To be fair, I think I spent much of my childhood saying that too, so it's fine. To be clear, Appalachia is not a monolith. So I am from just west of Pittsburgh. I'm in the northern panhandle of West Virginia. I would show you how to tell where that is, but you have to flip somebody off to do it. But it's a definite West Virginia thing, how you tell people where you're from in West Virginia. So I am from there. So I am really a mixture. My dad was a union coal miner for 25 to 30 years until the mine shut down around the Clean Air Act. And he went back to school and he was a respiratory therapist for another 15 years or something like that. I was raised in a mixture of like coal. I was raised on the Ohio River. So it was a mixture of like coal and steel. And I think that that's a key demographic because I think that coal country is deeply rural. And I have a very real mixture of, say, like, you know, our Pittsburgh in a book was called The Paris of Appalachia. And I think that that's very real. Like, it's the cultural center of Appalachia. And so I was raised about 30 miles west of Pittsburgh. So I spent a lot of time there. I worked in Pittsburgh. So I'm I say all that because I'm this mixture of coal and steel. And I think that my bias is that, like, so I am not, when people say, like, you're not real Appalachian, what they're really saying is, like, you're not deep Appalachian, right? I had highways by my house. I had internet. I had these things. But the same sense is that, like, my family is only 2 or 3 generations removed from crawling out of, like, a holler, and it, like, family land that had, like, a clapboard shack, like, it barely a house. And my great great grandfather literally came out to go 2 counties up to get a job in the steel mill before unions, lost his arm in the mill, like, within a couple years, came back to try to work a farm, one-armed. My grandfather went into the coal mine. My dad followed a week after high school, followed my grandfather into the coal mine. And my dad, from an early age, said, like, you're going to college, right? So I'm first generation college educated. I'm a first generation graduate. And that's not uncommon where I'm from. Like, in the steel, like, a lot of my friends were first generation college graduates, or in their family, like the first person to go to college, the first person to graduate. So the way that has, like, shaped me early on, this was early last year, somebody asked me, and it really centered around this idea that, like, I've had a lot of tension with, as it relates to, like, protection and violence, because my dad was a caring man. My dad, I remember, like, one of the key things my dad taught me was, like, son, you shouldn't fight, but if you have to fight, you hit first and you hit hard. Violence should always be avoided, but sometimes it's unavoidable, right? And I don't ever remember learning in church or anywhere else that this doctrine of nonviolent, or not even nonviolent resistance, right? I was raised, I remember going out to picket lines, blockading. I wasn't blockading trucks. My dad, but we would take, like, meals to them. I remember when the Coke plant shut down in the town that I was in, and hundreds of my friends' parents lost their jobs. So I think when I talk about an Appalachian spirituality, I talk about a solidarity in suffering. I'm talking about being raised in a place where I saw wave after wave of people come in and exploit the land and exploit the people and the resources and then leave, and watching what that does to a community, people's spiritual lives, the way it reflects them, the way they view God, the way they view each other. And so it really came from this book I read by a Native American theologian, and he was talking about how the land that they're from is so connected, like a sense of place is so connected with the way they view God and spirituality. And I just started thinking, like, how has where I am from, because sometimes there's that disconnect when you're talking with people. Like, how can we see things so differently? And I'm just realizing how much the land and the place and the people impact the way we see God, and we read scripture and we understand and we break apart our experiences to fit, what we read and see. Does that answer your question, I think?
I'm incredibly so. Yeah, I'm fascinated.
Okay.
You kind of started to touch on, like we said, I took a deep dive into some of your blogs and some of your philosophy that you've posted about. You kind of touched on that tension of protection. I don't remember the way you said it in that statement, but in your bio, you say the fist and the flowers. Can you give us a little bit, take us into the fist and the flowers?
Yeah, so the fist and the flower was really this attempt to say, like, my experiences growing up in Appalachia were this mix of gritty, I was raised in a mill town that was well past its prime. And, the sidewalks were crumbling and the schools were still pretty decent, but we were already beginning to see like a decline in populations year after year after year. And new stores didn't come in. You just kind of waited to see which stores closed. And I was raised with that grittiness of labor and work and grind, and watching our fathers just come home so tired and living to work, but also mixed with just this, not only the beauty of the people in the community that were always willing to help, but also this rich natural landscape of rivers and creeks. And, my dad took me backpacking at an early age in our state. And I discovered my first thin places in Dolly Sods and in this wilderness in the Monongalia Forest. And so my theology has always been this mixture of very like contemplative, like I remember watching like the creek roll by a rock that I was sitting on in the creek and just feeling like I was a million miles away from everything, but that God had never been closer. I just remember God feeling so close. But, and even my high school, like, it was surrounded by this, like, it was like in a cove of like hill and creek. But the experiences inside of that school and the experiences in these like windowless bars as I came up were just violent. They were full of hurting people. And I can look back now and just see like hurting families and hurting people, and in the way that played out made you often feel like it was like a survival, a game of like, it could make you, I always say, like I had a poem that I wrote once. It was like talking about like this Milltown mediocrity that just made you feel not quite good enough, like not quite good enough for the people that I would meet in college, not quite good enough for the richer families in the area, not quite good enough for, my parents were wonderful people, but they wanted so much for me that I think feeling not quite good enough to live up to the expectations of my family. And I think that that's what it is. That fist and flower is this tension that I hold of this contemplative life that is so rich inwardly, with so much of the gritty ugliness that you have to pragmatically deal with.
As you're talking about this, like the thing I keep thinking about is the Sermon on the Mount, and specifically this idea that when Jesus is talking, he's not talking to the haves. He's talking to the have-nots. He's talking to the lower class, hardworking, blue-collar people who are constantly being crushed by forces beyond their control, economically crushed by forces beyond their control, and they're on the losing end of all of it. And Jesus is showing up in the middle of that and saying, actually, you're the ones who are blessed. You're the ones...
The mumsers.
The what?
The mumsers.
I don't know what that means. Can you explain that to me?
Yeah, it's a Jewish term that means like the outsiders. So Jesus would have been, for all intents and purposes, we know that that's a whole nother tangent. But Jesus would have been a mumser. He would have been seen as like his biological father would have been known to not be his real father. So he could never have gone to like the upper levels of like schooling. Like that wouldn't have been available to him. I read really great like research that said like that maybe John the Baptist was Jesus's rabbi, because John was kind of an outsider, and maybe he taught Jesus because John would have been from a priestly family. But there's some people that say that Matthew was written to the outsiders. He would have been written to the outsiders of the Jewish faith, the people, and that's why the Sermon on the Mount is so powerful there. That it's all. If you look at all the stories of Matthew, it's almost every story is an outsider. It's a person that wouldn't have been accepted. Which, when we look at our cultural landscape today, right? Like Matthew to me is the gospel of the church today, because we keep trying to figure out how to deal with all these marginalized groups that shouldn't be included, and we have a whole gospel for it.
But I think what's really interesting to me is like so much of the Christianity that at least I grew up with, and it's interesting because I grew up lower middle class. It wasn't like I grew up with like in tons of economic privilege, although certainly some, but I still would say so much of our cultures were in a lot of ways wired for the haves or the about to haves. And what I'm hearing you talk about, it feels like as you've kind of come back to a re-owned faith, that so much of what's baked into your DNA is this sense of the mumsers, the people who are the downtrodden, and that this is a message that's for them.
It doesn't bring ties to the plate, right? Like, we're not building buildings with the mumsers. We're not raising capital campaigns with the people that need Jesus most. We're just not. We're not. You're not buying new tennis shoes. You're not gonna get a personal jet. You're not gonna, put new stained glass in. You're not. You're gonna give, and you're gonna give, and you're gonna give. And you're going to sell, and you're going to sell, and you're going to sell, and you're going to have faith, and you're going to have to hope it works out and that God shows up. And man, that is not a good business model. And it's not a good business model. Faith is not a good business model.
No, I struggle with that. Honestly, I'm the pastor, and like right now, literally, this is being recorded from the church that I'm a pastor at, which is in a pretty affluent suburban area. And I think about this all the time. All the time is like how
I'm going to be super popular.
No, I mean, I'm resonating with so much of what you're saying. I mean, that's my challenge is what does it look like for me to lead a church community in a gospel that was entirely pitched toward people who aren't them? Mm-hmm. Like, what does that look like? And not that it's not for them, but it's like, we're the rich young ruler. We're that person who's like, well, give up everything and come follow me. And he's like, he wants to, but man, that's a high cost. Man, that's a big ask. As opposed to the people who don't have anything. And they're like, sure, I'll give you my nothing. And it's like, what does that look like?
Yeah. And let's be like, I'll be real honest. Like, I talk about these things.
Right. Yeah.
But when people say like, well, why don't you sell your house then? Hey, that's a good point. I've done work in the Thai Myanmar border, and they have nothing. Do you know how many people that I could feed and shelter and give clean water to if, I would downsize my life, even though I don't have anything. I mean, I live in a decent house. My house looks nicer than it is because it's in West Virginia. Like, I know that like my house anywhere else would be super expensive. Right? Like, I live downtown. Like, I tell people like my car has chipping paint on the hood. Like, I don't have a lot, but I still have more than 90% of the people on the earth. Right? Like, I've been to other countries. I have new clothes on my back. I don't smell bad. My water bottle is a Yeti water bottle. I could have, you know what I mean? Like, we're all hypocrites. So I hold all of this in tension.
It's not like Jesus isn't actively at work in all of that. It's like figuring out how do we live in that tension that we're being invited into something that shouldn't feel too comfortable, right?
It's good eye, bad eye, right? Like I'm getting ready to do a talk at a conference, and I'm talking about this Jewish idea of like from the Sermon on the Mount of the eye being the light to the soul, right? And it's this Jewish idea of good eye, bad eye, that you see a good eye is a worldview of abundance and harmony and shalom, and that you see the world as symbiotic. And the bad eye is this eye that sees a world of scarcity and competition and jealousy And that fuels, right after that, God goes into this talk about anxiety, because I think a bad eye fuels this idea of worry and anxiety and stability and building silos and building wealth to protect, to hedge, to build fences and fortresses. Our fences aren't enough. We need fortresses. We need towns. We need armies. We need to protect. And I think what God is really saying in the Sermon on the Mount, what he's saying to the rich young ruler, what he's saying when he talks about building storehouses, isn't that having a savings account is bad. It's when that savings account is your security. It's when you like when you won't, if I have $250 in my bank account and I see somebody that needs help, and I know that it will take $200, but I have a $150 bill coming up. Am I obedient to God when he says give $200, even though that doesn't sound logical to my situation? Or will I do it? Right? Will you downsize your life if God tells you to downsize your life? That's what matters. I don't think that I think God says it is more difficult. It is more difficult. It's not impossible. But it's more difficult to enter into the kingdom of God because you don't need God. You don't think you need God. You might think you need the social cloud of being a Christian. Maybe that's advantageous. Maybe you think you need the structure. Maybe you think you need the people or the network, or maybe you need the ritual, or maybe you need the emotional catharsis of a spirited worship, or you need the spiritual catharsis of a liturgy. Whatever it is, you're still filling the needs for yourself. It's still self-help. So I think that the message of the kingdom is saying, and I think what Jesus is talking about in the Sermon on the Mount, are blessed are those that have nowhere to go. You have no hope. I'm your hope. God, Adonai, is your hope. He is for you. He is not against you. And woe to you who store up treasures when you see the need in the kingdom. Mm-hmm. You've already received your reward. Mm-hmm. Right? You've already received your security.
Well, I think there's a lot to hold in tension in following Jesus, because it is, I think, what Jesus walked in the society, in the empire, who he put together as his disciples, like everything, there was tension in that space. Our humanity to God's goodness presents tension, right? And navigating that will always be the case. But you've said so much that's so beautiful and speaks to a lot of core of where I found myself reaching into what I believe about Jesus and what he calls us to. I did read something on your blog that was talking about the 5, I'm going to mess up what the title was, but like 5 points of kind of anchors of how you practice your faith. And so as we've talked about the whole maybe philosophy behind it, what we believe about it, what does that look like in practice for you? What are those? You can talk about those 5 things, or just give us what does that look like practically for you?
Once again, it goes back to that Native American theologian. I started trying to think of what the key parts, if I were to define what an Appalachian spirituality was all about, because you have a Franciscan theology, characteristics of a Franciscan theology. These are things that kind of guide them. And what I realized is so much of we are so broken that most of the things aren't good. So what is it if it was to be redeemed? If God were to step into Appalachian and redeem us back to our spiritual inheritance, what do we have to teach the world? And the 5 are a respect and return to cultivating the land, being fast to charity and slow in discernment, relationship over rightness, service to the dignity of all creation, and a solidarity in suffering. Real quick, did you ask for a real quick rundown of what those mean to me? So these are also the characteristics of the Appalachian Order, this new rule of life that I'm living out with 8 to 10 brothers in a very new monastic sort of way. So new monastic, meaning we're not living in like a monastery together. Some of us are there. You have somebody in North Carolina, somebody in Minnesota. A lot of us are in this 30-minute, 40-minute region. So the first one, a respect and return to cultivating the land. For me, when the Scots-Irish and the Germans moved into Appalachia, they crossed the Alleghenies into this area that like even the indigenous populations like didn't settle because it was supposed to be haunted. It was full of brambles, and like people would like send like hunting dogs in and they would just never come out because they would get lost and not be able to find their way out. But for the Scots-Irish, the fun fact, the Appalachian Mountains and the mountains in Ireland and England are the same, or most likely the same mountain range. Like they have the same sediments. I mean, all the continents were together and now they're not together. Same mountains. So one of the oldest mountain ranges in the world. So when the Scots-Irish and the Germans came over the Allegheny Mountains, it was like, oh, this is home. Like the soil is the same. We know how to grow on it. We know how to grow on this. So they just stopped moving. And they were connected to that land. The land, they were sustenance farmers. The land served them and they served the land. There was ritual around that land to protect it. Some folk traditions, some parts of their faith. They built churches. There was a connection there. When timber and coal specifically came in to fuel this new industrial boom on the East Coast, they needed to fuel their factories. They needed to fuel their trains. What they did was they came in, they didn't respect the land titles that were there. They essentially just took the land because there was no official thing that, had been given. And so these these whole families, their homesteads were taken. And so now they had nothing to work. They had nothing. So now they just went into the mines because they had no other way to support themselves. So over the last 100 plus years, every generation, if you look at my generational story that I told you, sustenance farming, my grandfather had a garden. My dad had a smaller garden. I have no garden, right? I am more disconnected from the land than my ancestors were. So for me, the first one is getting reconnected to the land that we're from. What grows? How does it grow? Getting our hands into dirt and reconnecting with where we're from at a very like visceral level. One of the actual rules that we have is that you have to grow something. I don't care what it is, but it has to grow and it has to fruit. I don't care if it's a pot, it's a tomato plant on your back porch. I don't care if it's a mushroom container. I don't care what it is. It can be, rosemary on your garden sill, but you need to grow something and you need to taste the fruits of that work and that symbiotic relationship. And a respect. I think that we've lost respect for our land. We care that it poisons our drinking water, but we don't care if we could still do it and not have poisonous drinking water, that would be okay. We don't. Genesis 2, we're made gardeners. We're to cultivate this chaos to bring out its potential, and instead we use it for our own gain. So that's one. Fast to charity, slow in discernment. If you break down in Appalachia, somebody will stop, most likely more for one of you than the other, because you should know how to change your tire. But even if you know how to change a tire, they will still stop. Fast and charity. If you need clothes, if you need food, if you need whatever, Appalachians at our best are fast to charity. What we have not always been great at over time is being slow to discern. I think that our grandfathers, I think they were slower, but we are. Industrialization says you just make snap decisions, right? You make a decision, you face the consequences, you adapt, you change in real time. But I think a redeemed spirituality says that you're fast to help, right? But you're slow to trust. You're slow to test the spirit, test the haints, as they would say, test the spirits. You're slow to kind of get a feel for things and to see what is true and what is not true, but you help along the way. Relationship over rightness, man, this is social media all over for me, right? It is a respect and a reverence for our interconnectedness as human beings, and an acknowledgement that if me being right means that our relationship is severed in some way, even for a short time, then in many cases that rightness, that conversation wasn't ready to happen, or I didn't have it in the right way. So for the most part, except with bullies, because once again, fist and flowers, I hold that intention, I choose relationship over being right. First of all, I can feel like I'm right inside without having to make you feel like you're wrong. Why do I need for you to think I'm right? I don't need that in most cases. Unless you and I are in positions of leadership and we're trying to hash something out, that's different. But even then, I feel like we don't have to be right. We can be pragmatic. Service to the dignity of all creation. This, when its first iteration was its first writing draft was the service to the dignity of all humanity. But I didn't think that went far enough, because while humanity is very important, I also think that part of the problem we have, and I eat meat. I mean, this out in the open, like burgers are my favorite food. I eat steak as often as I can. But I think that there is something to be said for the industrialization of livestock. And once again, coming back to it, this idea that we treat living things as a commodity for our own ambition and satisfaction and enjoyment, without recognizing that they are part of God's creation, that they too were tov. They too were good, and they came before us. God loves those things. Maybe we were very good. Maybe we are middle management in God's creation, right? But that does not mean that he loves the rest of his creation less, and that he is okay with us exploiting that creation for our own unfettered ambition. So for me, the service to the dignity of all creation is saying, one of my goals for this year, when I do eat meat, is to be more mindful of sourcing that locally, of knowing the farmers where I do source that from. And I'm lucky to live in an area where that's possible. I know that that's not possible for everyone, but I am. And so because I am, I feel like I have a responsibility to that. Now, how faithful I will be to that, I mean, I'm not going to be one of these people that walk into a restaurant and it's like eating meat to sacrifice to idols. Like, I don't know that I'm going to ask everybody where this meat came from, but I would like to get to the point in my own family where, and my wife and I have talked about this, that we buy locally, that we know that the animals were treated. This goes back to that whole, like, even almost indigenous thing of, like, you kill an animal, you thank it for its energy and its sacrifice, you make a tobacco sacrifice. You give back to the land something equal that you took from it. There, and the fifth one, that solidarity and suffering, I mean, it is firmly and unapologetically rooted in the labor movement. I make no apologies for that. But also beyond that, before there was a need for labor, there were people if a family in your, I know I say holler like it's like a fun word, but like, I don't know if you know what a holler is, but like, you have two hillsides and a stream running down the middle, and people park their houses on the thing, so they get run off. But if somebody in your hall, a mile down the road or the path, if they were hurting, you were hurting. Mm-hmm. How could you eat a meal when you knew the children down the road were starving, right? Like, you would go without, a little bit without. Maybe you kill a second hog that year to make sure that they get through the winter. Maybe you have a little less through the winter to make sure they get through the winter, knowing that next winter it could be you, right? And so there was a symbiotic relationship amongst the people, trying to make sure that everybody survived, that there was enough for, the land would produce enough for everybody. So that solidarity and suffering for me is, yes, rooted in labor, but also just rooted in this that we're all in this together. In a way, if my brother, if his family is financially struggling, is it okay for me So let's talk about like the Appalachian Order, right? And we have people that we've taken this bond to each other. If I know that somebody is suffering and they're not feeding their family, is it sinful by omission for me to go out to a dinner with my wife on Friday for $150, even if it's her birthday, when I know that they don't know how they're going to put cans on the shelves, right? Is that a sin? Is that a solidarity? That solidarity in suffering. When somebody that God has placed into my life in communion with me is suffering, I believe that we are also called to suffer until we are back to that level.
I feel like I'm hearing you talk, and what I'm feeling is that our maybe I should just say the way I am practicing this whole following Jesus thing has on many levels gotten too far into the realm of like the theoretical. I wonder even, because like so many of the things that you're saying, I can hear, a little bit of you being like, listen, I know this sounds liberal, but I kind of don't care. And it's because like the reason is like, this has nothing really to do with like which larger political party does this fit into. This is more of a lived out, like this is what a lived out practical theology looks like in my setting and in my container. And I'm kind of wondering like, to what extent have we developed like church cultures and theologies that aren't rooted in our place? And because they're not rooted in our place, they become very theoretical, they become very abstract. And I wonder even to what extent this is the reason that people are more and more finding churches to be a place that is irrelevant spiritually, is because it's gotten so, our cultures have gotten so disconnected from our lived in realities that there's no there. And we can just kind of feel it a little bit. And so, I mean, so many of us are living in different cultural realities than yours, but I wonder if like the call, at least for me, what I'm wondering is like, great, so what does it look like for me to then try to get a sense of place of what does it mean for our church to be where it's at? And what does it mean for us to flesh out a lived in theology that flows out of that? This is so good, man.
I was just going to say, I feel like some of what makes that challenging in what we're living in now is the access to the entire world, right? It's really hard for me to feel like I can meet needs when I can see what's happening in Gaza and in Palestine right now. And then I can see what's happening in Congo, and I can see what's happening right here in America with police brutality, all the things, all the problems that I can see happening, and the paralyzing feeling of, well, I can't really do anything, so I'll just do nothing. And that, again, maybe that like lack of place or lack of rootedness in a community where you can actually take steps, where you can make decisions collectively. If we've lost that ability as a church to do that, to make that movement, then yeah, the overwhelm is really hard to push past.
That's good.
Yeah, because I mean, well, first of all, I mean, that sounds like really like C.S. Lewis, like Screw Tape Letter-ish, right? Like, let's just give them so many things to be upset about that they can't see the things right in front of their face, right? If they're worried about everything, if they're sad about everything, if they're broken about everything and all of those things, like, listen, I'm not minimalized. I mean, children being shot, trying to get food aid, if that doesn't break you, then you're broken in other ways. If you get shot in the back because you're wearing a hoodie in the wrong neighborhood, and in the 21st century, I don't want to hear any nonsense. I got no time for nonsense. Like, you're closer to the fist than you are the flowers, right? Like, I don't want to hear any nonsense. No wonder no wonder we're angry, right? So, but in the other real sense, like, I think one of the things that was a tipping point for me was like Paul's letter to the church in Ephesus, Paul's letter to the church in Corinth. Each of our places has very specific needs and obstacles and challenges that need to be confronted. And what the people in my region struggle with are not going to be the same that the people that are surrounding you struggle with. The people, and at a more micro level, the people in your community, your faith community, your church, are not going to be the same problems as those that might live in the same city on the other side of the tracks, or maybe even in a different affluent neighborhood. I always say that if I planted a church, I don't ever see my ministry being behind the walls of a church. God could change that, and maybe church looks different. But when I went to seminary and they talked about ordination, I was like, I just want you to know, like, I have no ambition for me to graduate and you to give me a job in like a great church. That sounds awful. That sounds like the opposite of what I want to do. But if I were to plant a church, I would plant in a place, and I would build block by block by block. I wouldn't move to block number 2 until I knew every family and their needs on block number 1. And I wouldn't move to the next neighborhood until I wouldn't move across the highway until this part of the highway I knew the needs and the families, or I had other people that knew the needs and the families. I'm not saying I have to. I'm not that, I got 6 kids, so, but as a community, you say, this is this parish model. This is my community. And there is going to be no need, not that I would collaborate, I would do all of these things, but if somebody in my block is suffering, I have no business trying to reach the affluent neighborhoods 10 miles away to try to get them to drive in, right? God's planted you in an affluent neighborhood. My challenge to you would be, where's your partner church in a non-affluent neighborhood?
Yeah, and I think so much of it probably is, as I'm hearing, it's so cliche, but it's are we learning how to, and I'm, charismatic enough, I guess, to like kind of lean this way. Like, are you hearing the voice of Jesus? Are you listening to the Holy Spirit? And are you saying yes to that? And it's like, are you following? And like, just like, which is something you said, 30, 40 minutes ago now, but that was what you were talking about. Is like, am I willing when Jesus asks to say yes, and like to build cultures around that? This is all such good stuff, Nathan. I just want to say thank you for unpacking all this. We do, the way we tend to end our podcast is with just a series of rapid fire questions. Some of them are the same every week. Some of them change based on our conversation as they go. What is one thing that you believe now that you might be wrong about?
As Christians, our calling to be involved in politics.
Ooh,
I have Anabaptist leanings, like that defiant. Like, I think when Tony Campolo once said that when you mix politics and religion, the politics never come out worse for wear, but the religion ends up tasting like, like I have long held increasingly that I've kind of moved my life to a place where I've been politically agnostic, that neither party is going to get us where we need to go, that nobody's on our side. But I would say over the last 6 months or so, I've had this like tickle that says I can hold that neither party is going to get me where I need to go in America, but that being political, that we've lied to ourselves that being political means that I have to align with a party. Being political means that I align myself with the human need and the suffering, and that I don't care who gets me there. I don't think either one's still going to get me there, but that being political means making the best decisions possible in the moment for the people. So I find myself being more willing to talk on political issues, where as I try to stay above that fray, but more and more I tend to find myself getting into the weeds.
When is the last time you laughed really hard?
A couple weeks ago. I don't even remember what was said. It was me. We were having family dinner, but my 3 boys and I were kind of having a side conversation, and one of them just burned the other one like so good that even the one being burned was like
respect.
Yeah, like it was just so good. That was probably my kids are getting old enough that I can enjoy them, right? Like I'm not just constantly like they're funny and they have personalities and they're like putting the work in and following their dreams, and I just get to support them, and they let me in on the story, and I'm super grateful for that. But they're funny kids. They're funny.
Last one. Who is someone else that we need to have on this podcast?
Oh man.
Everyone tells us that's not a rapid fire question.
No, I think it's actually a personality. This is like a personality test. There's some people who don't care that much, and then there's people who are theologically wired, like you, who are just deep thinking readers who are like, you can't just throw that at me. That's not fair.
I can't pick just one.
He doesn't.
It's not the way the world works.
He doesn't have. If you like this stuff about like mumsers and the intersections of like Judaism and like the Christian faith. There's a guy on Twitter, and he's in our order. His name is Eric. Oh, man, I'm so excited about telling you his name that I can't remember his stupid name.
Eric, we'll find him.
How many Erics can there be?
No, you won't.
SEO's probably real low on Eric's.
Yeah.
Funny.
Eric Jones, at Petrolhead Jones. I can shoot you his thing. Eric is doing a project right now that he loves the text, and he wants to get closer to the text. And he is currently, since the beginning of the year, handwriting one chapter of the Bible each day, 2 to 3 hours a day, handwriting in journals. When he is done, he will have a handwritten copy of Scripture. He's like a bigger beard than me. He's like a mechanic. He teaches like middle school, like career kind of stuff, like career exploration at his local middle school. He can fix anything. Super like one of the most humble guys you would ever met. But God, he just loves Jesus. Like you want to talk about getting into the weeds. This man like just wants to know Jesus better and will do whatever it takes to get there. He just wants to know God. And there's a million people that I could tell you that are more like theologically based, people that I think have wonderful ideas. I could send you a laundry list of people you need to talk to. But when you ask me, he is not the obvious answer. And he would tell you that he would tell you that me telling you his name is the most ridiculous thing he's ever heard. But you cannot talk to this man and not come away blessed and feel the heart that you come away being like, man, I need to pursue God like this guy is pursuing God. And he wasn't raised in the church. He was raised in like a biker family. His story is crazy. But he just found Jesus, and Jesus filled every need that he had. And that's who I would listen to that podcast.
Great answer. I love that.
Super cool guy.
I feel like the move is whenever these people come on the podcast, we use these clips as the intro for them because
that's good.
That's like that's high praise.
Yeah.
So
Nathan,
Eric blesses me, man.
So Nathan, how can people find you? Like, what would you like to promote? What would you like to tell people about what you're up to and doing, and how they can keep following what you have going on?
I am literally everywhere at Story of N.D. Blake. Website, every social media platform, at Story of N.D. Blake. StoryofNDBlake.com is attached to my Substack. I'm starting, one of my keys for this year is to write more consistently, and treating that as a spiritual discipline. But Twitter, I'm Twitter and Instagram I live on most of the time. I'm becoming more like liberal with adding people on Facebook, mostly because they make me feel more safe from the people I actually know on Facebook.
Dilutes it a little bit.
Yeah, like I'm like, oh, okay, like you guys make me feel safe from the people that know me.
I think that's a pretty felt universal feeling of interacting on Facebook.
Yeah, Facebook is rough, man. I would take a million slings and arrows on Twitter versus like one person that I respect from my childhood that's like, actually it says in John blah 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 blah, and I'm like, I don't want to have this conversation with you. Like, I love you, you've been a key person in my life, but we're not going to agree on this, and we should just leave it at that. But yeah, everywhere at Story of Indy Blake.
Love it. Yeah, absolutely. Find Nathan, check out what he's doing, specifically his website where he does have blogs that on his Substack that are going up frequently. That's Taylor and I have had the privilege this last week of kind of downloading all of that and reading more. There's a lot more we didn't get to, so please check all that out. Nathan, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much.
Oh man, thank you for having me. You guys are wonderful.
Well, thank you once again for listening to the God is Better Than You Think podcast. Thank you to Nathan for all of his time and that incredible conversation. I know you hear this all the time. It really does help us get the word out about this podcast whenever you rate, review, subscribe, comment, all of those things.
All those things.
And so
I want to contribute.
And so when you do that, it really helps more people find out about us. And
helps
so
more people.
If you would be willing to do that, that would be such a blessing. Can you tell that this is late? Also, I just use the word blessing, which I never use that word seriously. Anyway, you get the point of what I'm saying. Thank you to Monument for our music.
Thank you.
And we will be back again in a couple of weeks with our next guest. So we'll see you then.
See you next time.
I'm going to try that one more time, just in case I
Oh, we were so cool, though. That was so vibey. Come on, boy.
Oh, God.
Just record it again.
I'm just one more take, just in case I listen to that. I'm like, that was terrible.
It's going to be stiff.
It might be. No. You think that's the space that we're in right now?